Okay, on today's meeting, we have a very special presentation from Robbie Mitchell from Pulse. Without further ado, I think we can get right into Robbie. Are you ready to present?
Yep, let's rock and roll.
Let's do it.
Cool. Thanks very much for having us to present here at the Cybersecurity SIG. It's my first SIG meeting out of all the 7 or 8 SIGs that Internet Society is affiliated with. So just good to understand what sort of discussions go on here. Just a little bit of background. I've been with the Internet Society for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was with APNIC, so the Regional Internet Registry in the Asia Pacific region, for about 8 years. My background is actually in biotechnology and media comms. So I viewed my time with APNIC as my apprenticeship to all things about the internet. Before that, it was plug and play for me. Now I have a better appreciation of the internet ecosystem, as well as the cybersecurity part of that as well. I'm just here today to give the group an introduction to the Pulse website and the internet measurement project that the Internet Society has been running since about 2020. So at the Internet Society, while we're measuring the internet, and in that respect, what we are measuring is the availability, the evolution, and the resilience of the internet. It comes down to same sort of reasons why we measure anything in terms of wanting to answer questions. You need to have the data to be able to back that up. We also need to have baselines and be able to set baselines to be able to then show the impact that we want to have. That's particularly become important when we're starting to go into this new 5-year strategy. We have a 2030 strategy. If you haven't seen it on the Internet Society website, that is really based a lot in setting those baseline criteria and trying to work towards where we want to get to. Our project, we have outward facing component, which is the Pulse website, which I'll go through. We also have an internal role as well to help other projects in the Internet Society be able to understand and measure their impact. I'm happy to answer some questions with regards to that. We're also looking to engage more with the community and understand their data needs, being able to help them find the data and use the data to be able to tell the stories or justify whatever they're trying to do as well. As I mentioned, this project was launched in 2020, and the outward facing part of this project is the Pulse website. Quick proviso about the Pulse website. We don't create any data yet with Pulse or this project. What we do is we collate data from various open data sources on the web and bring it together to try and tell a story of the resilience of the internet for most of the work that we're doing. The target audiences that we're really getting towards are the decision makers, journalists, and civil society groups. This isn't necessarily at a researcher level, because researchers understand where a lot of these data sources are and they're comfortable with how they're presented currently in those forms. And they understand how to be able to draw them together for themselves, whether it's through APIs or just their own platforms. So we're trying to create this space to help those who don't necessarily have the background and context associated what the internet is and how you can measure its resilience. These are the partners that I mentioned. It's a growing list all the time. And some of these you might be also using for yourselves. We're always looking for new partners. And again, the partners that we rely on are those that are supplying open data sources. I'll be concentrating a lot on the security metrics that we are collecting for some of the parts of the website. And keep that in mind that we can only draw at the moment from those open sources. We know that there are some very good private sources out there or paid for services, which most of you would be probably tapped into. That's just not what we're working towards. We're trying to make all this data public so everyone can make use of it. I've talked about internet resilience a bit. That's one of the key things that we're trying to measure: availability, evolution, and resilience. From our perspective, resilience, we're talking about the redundancy that is being put in place to keep the internet on when things go happen. Perfect example is what's been happening in Spain, Portugal, Morocco, and south of France and Andorra over the past 28 hours. There's a lot associated with internet resilience. I'll show the profile of the metrics that we're trying to capture. We recognize that electricity, the dominant factor associated with the internet for us. If there's no electricity, there's just no internet. That's full stop. It doesn't matter how secure your networks are. It doesn't matter how good your equipment is, how much redundancy you've developed, how many peers you're peering with. All that goes out the window once the lights go off. So there's some difficult components to the internet that we're still trying to incorporate into this model or framework rather that we're trying to showcase. This framework that we have developed related to resilience is this Internet Resilience Index. It pulls different metrics from all the different data sources that I showed before. And we've tried to make sense of it by putting it into these columns associated with infrastructure, performance, security, which I'll be talking about, and market readiness. These were the initial ones that we established 4 years ago. We are well aware, as I said before, about the need to expand these to incorporate external utility factors and also looking at areas of interest, particularly environment and natural disaster, how resilient networks are to whatever trends are coming down the pipeline. In terms of security, this is again the sub-pillars that we are currently drawing information on and sources of the metrics that we are currently drawing. That's pretty much the nutshell of that. And I always find it's easier to just talk to the tool while using it rather than doing slides. So if you're all happy, I'm just going to switch over, show you what this site is so you can appreciate it in that respect. You can understand the different topics that we're trying to cover by the navigation. The one that I've just talked about is this resilience. When you navigate to resilience, you will come to the temperature map for each of the countries, and you can start to see what the resilience of that country looks like. It has basic hover functionality, but you can break this down into the regions themselves. We have a lot of people from Africa on the call, so I'll go into Africa to show that. It breaks it into the sub-regions. You can start to see with these donut charts where a lot of these sub-regions excelling in is security. In all of these sub-regions, security is their number one resilience factor. I'll talk a little bit about that as well, but understandably, infrastructure is still a challenge for a lot of these sub-regions. We'll go into the sub-region itself, and then you can start to see and compare how each of the countries in that sub-region fare with regards to the index. Like all indexes, these scores are in relation to all the other countries globally. I say all the other, it's about 186, I think we're up to at the moment. We're limited by the sources of data that we're drawing from, having data on each of these countries. Again, this is another limitation of working with open data sources, but what we are always trying to do whenever we're collating a data source is to have it covering as broad of a number of countries as we can, loosely around 150 countries. The data source has data on 150 countries, then we can consider it because it's feeding into all these other features that we have. There's no questions at the moment, so I'll plow on through.
Just one question, if I may. Have you ever thought about going more granular to specific states with the data?
You mean for the US?
But you can't segment by the 50 states within United States.
Yeah, no, this is another limitation of when we're measuring the internet. These projects are working predominantly at a national level. They're not working at a regional level. We are campaigning for projects like Ripe Atlas, as well as we established our own measurement framework within Africa, which is where this resilience framework was born. It works along the similar lines of what RIPE Atlas is in terms of developing a probe system using Raspberry Pis, which we distributed between our members in Africa. That significantly improved our understanding of performance metrics across Africa. We know of other projects out there who are developing indigenous measurement systems. The prime example is in India. The ISOF Kolkata chapter has been involved in developing an indigenous measurement system with support from the Indian government, where they are actually creating a system to be able to show the performance in a lot of other metrics, particularly associated with DNS resilience for each of the states in India. So long story short, we would love that data, but it's very difficult to come across.
Gotcha. Thank you. Because I was thinking about how like Starlink is now adding coverage in areas that don't have coverage. So that's what made me curious about more granular metrics.
Yeah. I will get to another project that is a part of the Measuring the Internet project at the end, which will provide a lot more granular data and for each country, even at state level. Remind me of that one. So you can go into each of these countries, and this is the profile that you get for the country. You start to understand how they stack up and where the challenges are. For Kenya, this information is coming from the ITU, so it's a percentage of the population within 10 kilometres of the fibre connection point. According to that, 25% of the country is within that 10-kilometre reach. There's obviously some work to be done there, but network coverage from the GSMA that's drawing from, that's really good. Spectrum allocation's good as well. This is something that aligns with another of the Internet Society programs, sustainable peering infrastructure, that we're measuring the number of IX and the number of data centers in a country. What we're interested in that respect is understanding how much popular content is stored locally and how that's an important factor, particularly for, say, landlocked countries, but as well as those who have singular submarine cable landing stations. When the upstream provider has an outage, that there's still local content that is stored within the country and is accessible through IXP. That's part of another advocacy program that we are working towards. Again, it shows that we're trying to find the data to be able to help justify the projects that we're working towards. All our performance metrics, they're coming from Ookla. We're currently also working with MLab to incorporate their data, and we're working towards a more agnostic version, say the least, on this, but it shows the standard performance metrics associated with it. You can see, unsurprisingly, fixed has its challenges, whereas mobile, which would be the dominant means of internet connectivity in Kenya, is a lot stronger. This is the one of interest for this group particularly. I'll talk a bit through this and how we are working towards changing this as well, because again, this is a first version that we've developed. It works for the purposes of the original project, but now we understand that it doesn't necessarily align a lot with particularly security. This HTTPS data, we're sourcing that from Mozilla. The limitation of that is associated with that Mozilla is used by about 5% of the internet users globally. It's only based on Mozilla data. We've come to the point where HTTPS is pretty much the standard now. It's not necessarily something that we need to track as specifically. We know Google does do this more granularly, but they only do it for 20 case study countries. Again, coming back, we want to show this for all countries. But again, we feel HTTPS has got to the point where we're comfortable with it just being the standard now and everyone agrees to it. IPv6 adoption, it has its so-called security features, but we recognize this now more as a evolutionary metric rather than a security metric. So understanding where the country is in terms of how it's developing towards the future and how we'll be able to finally move towards IPv6, whether or not it has enough IPv4 currently available and it meets its means. Also be good to understand its roadmap towards IPv6, considering that a lot of content is now IPv6, prefers IPv6 over IPv4. The DNSSEC, we work closely with ICANN with regards to this, and we're proponents of the DNS kindness initiative in that respect. Adoptions associated with the CCTLD signing DNSSEC, that's an easy one for a country to be able to get 100% on. It's either 100% or 0%. You can go through the site to be able to find where that DNSSEC adoption is in each of the CCTLDs. But that's something that we continually advocate for. And I was at APTLD in February, which is the top level domain registries for the Asia Pacific, campaigning for that. The next important part of DNSSEC though, or more important part of it, is the validation process. I'll show you some of the metrics associated with that later in another part of this site. Manners, ISOC was originally the founder of Manners and had for a long time been custodians of it until we passed that over to Global Cyber Alliance. And they're doing a great job with that. But we're obviously keeping an eye on the pulse in that respect and appreciate data that they're continually tracking with the Manners Observatory. We have a feed from that we're pulling the Manners score for each country, which is a combination of ROA and ROV adoption in the country. This is an interesting one, which I don't necessarily agree that it's security related, security components to it. But again, because it has a lot to do with market concentration and understanding particular redundancy with access outside of the country. But yeah, we're pulling that from CADA. The DDoS protection from CyberGreen, Global Cybersecurity Index, which ITU develops, and the World Bank's Secure Internet Service metrics as well. I think each of those three tends to be updated every 2 years. General metrics, which culminate several different metrics. Instead of us trying to pull in each of those metrics that they're doing, we just pull in their index. For those who are interested, we also look at market readiness. The title's a working title, but mainly it's looking at the supporting ecosystem, business ecosystem. And this is a big area that we will be starting to build out when we rework the framework on resilience. Another feature that we've recently updated is the country reports. These aren't necessarily reports, they're more profiles into the internet for each of the countries. We had Sweden, didn't we, here on the call? To give you an idea of what these look like, it gives you a précis of the main points pulled from the metrics below. You got basic demographic data that you can also draw from. Again, this internet resilience score, this features here, and you can click through to be able to see that profile. This can be an easy way to introduce people to website and they can dive deeper into where the data lives. It provides a better overview than just the internet resilience index. But yeah, you get the basic demographic data. A lot of this is pulled from ITU or World Bank, who are the main services that are actually doing this measurement data. It's always interesting to be able to see when the last data was being recorded as well for these projects. I'll let you look for your own countries and just understand some of the challenges that we are up against with trying to rely on these sources. For instance, say, even internet penetration for some countries, we're reliant on data from 2017. It's just that irregularly updated. We're continually out there campaigning in countries and at regional events for people in the community to put some pressure on those and to appreciate this work, because it's important work, particularly from a development perspective, to be able to show the impact of policies or introductions of new standards, improving the market to have new players come on, and then showing that impact. But yeah, you can get an understanding of all the different components from a technical standpoint. You can start to see market indices as well, being international connections. Sweden has FAIR. I mean, it's quite highly interconnected with its neighbors, Norway and Finland, and has, as we know, plenty of submarine cables that are being cut every now and then now to mainland Europe as well. Submarine cable data, we are looking at ways to try and draw that into this project as well. Currently, telegeography is the place. They don't necessarily have open data sources, but we are working with the industry to try and figure out a way to make that data open and be able to share that in this profile, because we appreciate the importance of those cables. Again, this sort of information is starting to become equally as important. The local infrastructure in place that can support locally distributed content for, again, when there is disconnection from the international internet. We're really campaigning for this and working towards more internet exchange points, particularly in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, to spread redundancy and bringing it closer to internet users as well as to the internet service providers. A big challenge for internet service providers connecting to an internet exchange point is just the need to have a connection to that internet exchange point, so running cables to it. There's opportunities to be able to set these up in places where there are other networks currently present. The top internet service providers, again, we show a breakdown of that, which can show the market concentration. You mentioned before, Danny, about Starlink. We're starting to now see Starlink as the top internet service provider in some country, particularly, I have to remind myself, Nauru. It's, I think, serving about 90% of internet services in Nauru. And there's another Pacific nation as well that it's 70 or 80%. Something that we'll be looking to track a lot more of. It's interesting, particularly those countries who are now starting to open up their markets. This will also be of interest for the current ISPs in place who have been concerned in some respects to the impact that LEO constellations will have on their businesses. Again, market information and the security stuff. This gives you a bit more detail associated with, say, the Global Cybersecurity Index, which I showed before, which is referenced in the Pulse Internet Resilience Index. The DNSX status is associated with the CCTLD. So Sweden, CCTLD has adopted DNSX. The basic routing security practices associated with each of the countries. So you can start to see that data drawn from Manners Observatory. If you haven't already known about Manners Observatory, you can go over there or you can check it out here. And you can see that DNSSEC coverage and adoption for each of the countries as well. Again, these profiles, we've just redone them to draw in a lot more demographic data, but particularly data that the community is requested for. So usage by gender, internet penetration, average internet costs. We're very much open to be able to improve and expand this as well when it comes to security, if there's a requirement for that from the community, and if it also aligns with some of those limitations that I've been pointing out along the way in terms of being an open source data and has a broad enough range across various countries. One of the final ones that I wanted to point out was this enabling technology. These are the fundamentals of the internet. We're measuring these. HTTPS adoption. Again, this is something that we're probably going to nick soon, just because it's at that point that pretty much every website of the top 1,960 odd using HTTPS, it's solid in that respect. This is not those networks that have adopted it, top 1,000 websites globally that support IPv6. That's near a 50% range. And that's important as well for countries to understand. Again, IPv4, they might have enough to be able to support their networks and population, but there will be a time where some websites will only be accessible through IPv6. So there's opportunity now to start planning for the deployment of IPv6 as well. And TLS 1.3, obviously it's had a fairly big increase since its adoption in 2019, 2018. It's at the point where it's plateauing now between 1.2 and 1.3. Again, this is the CCTLD. So you can see that, 65% of countries globally have adopted DNSSEC. And you can see the route validation and row coverage as well. With row validation, we're actually using Road Vista and not 8-NIC, which tends to be the one that's often used. I think Manners Observatory is now moving towards Road Vista as well. Finally, a big part of this project is also being able to showcase the research and analysis done associated with Internet Museum. It's well and good to be able to present the data and show it as I have. You can access all this through an API as well. Get it down to the bottom here. You can get that through the API. But for a lot of those audiences that I said at the start, those decision makers, civil society groups, journalists, for them, they need a bit of an explanation. This is where we do that through the blog. We're always looking for guest authors to be able to feature their research associated with the topics that we're advocating for. That can be related from an internet measurement perspective, as well as a development and resilience perspective. So just keep that in mind as an opportunity for those of you who are in the research community as a means to be able to reach out to what can be sometimes a different audience. It can be a very powerful audience as well. And we can help you in that respect. Outside of that, I can let you go. There's other things that we measure in terms of internet shutdown. We developed a tool called net loss, which it calculates the lost GDP for a country in the case of a internet shutdown. IXP trackers, fairly self-explanatory. It tracks the number of IXPs and traffic associated in each country.
Very impressive work that you guys are doing at Pulse. Extremely cool. The cybersecurity stuff is of high interest. Really appreciate the presentation, Robbie.
No worries. As I said, I'm here to collect that information from the community with the country reports. There was a lot of community feedback in terms of what metrics they wanted to be in that. This crowd, I understand that I'm preaching to, you're well aware of where those sources are, but think about this as a place where you can direct people to that don't have that understanding of the context, and it's being able to put it into the context of where security sits in the greater ecosystem of the internet as well, and it's an important part to play. So you're welcome to get in touch with me, Mitchell at isoc.org or pulse at isoc.org through either of those channels. I'll be joining the WhatsApp group as well because I'm interested to understand what are the themes that are of interest from your perspective and how we can potentially work in from a measurement standpoint. Oh, the last one, Danny, you mentioned about state level. Another project that we have adopted from Mozilla actually is the Open Fiber Data Standard. That is developing a standardized method to map terrestrial fiber cable globally. That's been going for the past 3 years. It was originally established by Mozilla and the World Bank. The Internet Society, under the Internet Measurement Project, has adopted it and is running with it at the moment. We're currently hosting and looking for hosts for workshops around the world to bring together decision makers who want to have a better understanding of what is underneath the ground or above the ground or wherever those cables are running at the moment. Obviously, it's a very important security issue as well to understand where network cabling for essential utility infrastructure and government data centers and all that, if there's redundancy in place, how that's being mapped, because it's spaghetti maps at the moment that aren't standardized and many government departments don't know where to turn to. That's a project that we're starting to ramp up.
Very cool. Sounds like some great initiatives you guys are up to. All right. Now that Robbie has presented Pulse, we open up the discussion to the team members for any questions for Robbie, comments, and discussion. Everybody feel free to unmute and join into the free discussion.
As a Kenyan, I'm both surprised and impressed by the reports that I saw on my country, but I'm a bit skeptical too. I think I need to look further into these numbers.
We welcome the skepticism. From our standpoint, what we're trying to present is an overview of what the ecosystem looks like, and then have people at a country level do regional based and local based measurements to be able to validate whether or not that is happening. We're proponents of getting that local data. We are trying to figure out a way to be able to showcase that local data as well, whether it's like a local resource that we incorporate it within the country profile. But you're welcome to be skeptic.
Thank you. One of the things I've been really keenly looking into is ways of collecting primary data on the threat landscape here, because when I'm looking into very specific areas or potential customer requirements or needs, I find that really raw data is very hard to come across for Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe West Africa, there's a lot of info there, but for East Africa, it's rare to come across really hard information you can use for your projects or your strategic alignments. But this is a good start. So thank you very much, Robbie.
You're welcome. Yeah, I totally understand from the cybersecurity perspective. People are very protective of the data that they have associated with security. It's justifiable, particularly security instances. But you talk to the certs around the world and they're all about sharing the data to be able to then work towards a coordinated approach, because it's very difficult to work towards a national approach when you're trying to secure your internet, because it's not necessarily your country's internet, it's the world's internet.
Agreed. You brought up something interesting regarding certs. I've never really tried to reach out to one as an individual or as a representative of an organization, but are they really that accessible? Has our SIG established some kind of partnership with any certs? You reckon? I guess that's just a general question, maybe.
I can only let Danny know because he probably has the most history on it. But my perspective, working in the Asia Pacific region when at APNIC, that they were very open, the certs that I dealt with, both at a country level and a regional level, open to researchers and not just necessarily certs between certs. For them, they want as much information as they can get, and they're happy to share that information. Obviously, when joining those conversations or joining particular groups, there's basic traffic light analogies associated with the sharing of information. But yeah, from my perspective, they're a pretty open community. But yeah, I'm not sure what this group has done in respect to collaborating with certs globally.
What type of collaboration were you referencing, Solo?
I guess just informational to begin with, being able to just get more data on certain regions, being able to understand also how we can contribute to the collection and analysis of that data. Like I said, like for Kenya, if I wanted to really see what's going on here in terms of ransomware right now, it's a huge blind spot. And I don't feel that many of the global organizations are investing that much in terms of detection infrastructure here just yet. If we're talking about honeypots and other data gathering methods, yeah, I feel like a lot of us are going in blind and just learning the hard way as we go in terms of how to tailor our security programs. For me, data, I feel, is the starting point. And it doesn't feel like we're very data driven in countries like Kenya at the moment. I'm not sure how I can link this to our SIGs initiatives, but I think it could be a very interesting area to look into. Yeah. I hope I'm not speaking prematurely on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a type of committee project that the SIGs have been working on, but where we've been focusing most of our muscle as cybersecurity SIG has been on the AI website security analyzer tool. That tool has cooperation from Internet.nl and Scam Advisor and Gaza and these types of organizations that are looking at website specific security rather than area geographical statistics, just because that's an easier mountain for us to tackle as a SIG for our working project.
No, absolutely. It makes sense. I've been through the slide deck and it's genuinely impressive. I'm really looking forward to learning more about this project.
Thank you, Robbie. Appreciate the Pulse presentation breakdown for everybody. It's another tool in our toolkit now that we can use within our work. Thanks everybody for hopping on today. Good to see everybody. With that, we wrap it up. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks.